Hello, guys, and welcome to another edition of the Joe Rogan Experience Review. Today, I'm reviewing Robert Oberst, podcast 1321. Robert is one of the world's strongman. He does the strongman competitions. And I was excited to see him on there. I knew one of the strongmen would come on after the competition. I have to say, personally, I'm a little biased and a little sad to see that Martins Lucius didn't go on. He's the guy that actually won the World Strongman recently, and he's a guy that I know. He used to come into my work, and I see him occasionally. He lives in my area and trains somewhere close by, so bit of a shame because I would have loved to have known that he went on and got to see him afterwards and talk to him a little bit about what it was like to be on Rogan's show. Though saying that, I do know another buddy of mine that is good friends with Joe and has been on Rogan's show as well. So I do get a little bit of an insight. I try not to bother them too much and be a bit too much of a fan of it. But since I have this podcast and I know people are interested and I'm interested, I always like to ask those questions. But Robert was a great guest, a fun guy, super nice. And let's start the review. So he's on a new show, I think on the History Channel. He did say he's a history major, which is pretty cool. And in that show, what he does is researches and tells stories about giants of the past, kind of like the David and Goliath stories and just any giants throughout history that have fought in wars and all the rest of it. One story he tells, and obviously he tells it a bit better than me, but I really enjoyed it, is the story of some giant in the Revolutionary War that was like 6'7". And the legendary story of him is that he picked this cannon up out of that was stuck in the mud. He picked it up and put it on his shoulder and carried it out of there because he didn't want, I guess, the English to have the cannon strategically, which, you know, can be a big deal in wars. I mean, in more modern wars, if you leave armaments behind, like a tank or whatever, what you'll usually blow it up so the enemy can't use it. But obviously they didn't have grenades back then. But yeah, just the idea that this dude was so big, he could like pull people off horses and just beat them to death with his bare hands, obviously being so massive. And then Robert talked about how George Washington even mentioned that he was like a one-man army and they couldn't have won certain battles without him. So pretty prestigious giant of the past, I would say, and good for him. It's pretty badass. I love those stories. One of my personal favorite stories is of a Viking berserker from, way back when they were around like 1100 AD. And I don't know who the king of England was at that time. I think there may have been multiple kings in that region. It wasn't kind of unified. But there was a huge battle of Vikings versus the English. And the Vikings thought they had the upper hand. But it turned out that it wasn't true. They got flanked by the English army, and they were trying to make it back to their boats. So the Viking king of the time just sent one of his berserkers, and the berserkers were like the biggest, strongest, craziest of them all, and stuck him on this bridge that was like a strategic spot to get across, a narrow bridge over the quite a large river. And the only way for the English to get to those Vikings was through this bridge, and this berserker stayed there and killed like over 100 men. It's such an incredible story, and obviously it was told by the English, so, they're not going to give credit to this guy that they were the enemy of, unless, he was really able to just kick some massive ass. I love that. I thought that it was such a brilliant story. Going back to some of the things that Robert's achieved, early in his career, when he started first doing strongman stuff, I guess there was this log lift, and it was like one of the first times he'd ever used it, and he broke a record, and that's just the power of these guys. Like, I know Martins, and when I speak to him and I talk about the types of training he does and the types of things, it just gets to a point where they're so strong in every way. It doesn't matter what the next type of massive lift is. They're fairly, they know the dynamic of it, and they just also know about creating so much power that they can just smash right through something. And if you think about how long people train to break world records, it's unbelievable. Like, you train at the same thing over and over and over again. But then you get these guys that are so monstrously strong, they can sit on a rower and just bash out like 100-meter record because they're just so powerful. It's just beyond powerful. There's some great videos online of strongmen going up against CrossFit guys. And they're doing these lifts, like clean and jerk type lifts, certain lifts that the strongmen don't even do all that often, and they're not even doing it with that great of form, and they're just powering this weight straight above their head. It's truly unbelievable what some of these guys can get up to. They talk some about Robert Frank and Robert Frank's Instagram. If you guys don't know who Robert Frank is, and you got to check it out. You've got to download his Instagram. He's absolutely hilarious. I didn't know of him until Joe's conversation with Robert, and then he came up. And the discussion behind that was who's getting banned from Instagram and how he is. And he doesn't have like a verified account as well. So a little bit of controversy. But man, you can go down a rabbit hole watching his videos. They are very, very funny. Joe plays one on the podcast, and it's one of his better ones for sure. And really the point that they're making with that is that guy in some way is a motivational dude. He's saying work out, get jacked, be jacked. And there's a lot of motivational people online, on social media. I mean, Joe is one. I think Robert is really pushing to be one. Jocko, Cameron Haynes, you name it. They're important. They're important guys. They're important to have in the dialogue and to be out there. I think they're really turning people around and making people's lives better. You know, they certainly make mine. They certainly have me thinking when I don't want to do something, when I get too lazy and I can't get motivated. I mean, you know, it can have a bit of a negative connotation. Like, you can hear it too much and it's almost like it just reminds you you're doing nothing and then you feel bad. But that's just a minor negative. When you sit back and really start to put the work in, and then you're like, oh shit, yeah, I'm going to do this today. And then you start listening to the Goggins and all the rest of it. And Joe running hills in the morning. You know, it's just nice to know that that's a wavelength that you can get on too. And very quickly, it doesn't matter how far behind you start, very quickly it changes your life. And starts to get you moving in a direction you want to move in for sure. And Robert gives Joe a lot of props for the same thing. I guess Robert knows quite a bit about the Comedy Store, what it was like when Joe wasn't there and before, and now that Joe's been back and how he's changed it, and gives him a lot of credit for the energy of the Comedy Store and how well it's done. And I have to agree. I've only lived in LA about 3 years, so I think Joe had been at the Comedy Store the whole time I've been here. So I didn't know what it was like before he was there and when he was there the first time. But I've heard stories. But I'll tell you what it is now, and I have some friends that perform at the Comedy Store pretty regularly. It's a really encouraging environment. There are still a little bit of like, oh, who's getting stage time and who isn't. But I mean, that's just the competitive nature of humans. That's okay. That's fun. It's fine, and you always have to learn to deal with a little bit of competitiveness. But the love that is up there, the support all the comedians get on other comedians' podcasts, it's almost like it's not a starvation, famine environment. It really is just kind of supportive and loving, and like, hey, there's lots of spots and everyone can have a good podcast and everyone can get on shows and get specials and get on YouTube and make good content. And I think that's fantastic. It really is, because that's the way you get the most and the best comedy, for sure. And you see it in LA. Like, there's so many comedy shows all the time being put on, and people really slugging it out and learning the art, and it makes it great learning as a comedian. I mean, for one, you could say, oh, there's just too much, it's too saturated. But that's bullshit. All it means is the community is massive, and it's everywhere. and you can go to a different open mic and perform every night if you want to. And this shit is hard enough. The last thing you want is just for there to be only one, open mic that you can barely get on, and you've got to travel for an hour to get there. It would be a nightmare. It really would. Robert jumps into the Bob Lazar stuff for a little bit. I like to go back to it as well. It's been a few weeks now since Bob was on, and there's so much talk on it. It's my most downloaded review ever. It's my most watched review on YouTube, and people get into the comments and they're like, hey, you should do another review, like a second part. I'm like, I don't know what else to review. I guess I could watch the documentary and review that, but kind of the point of what I do is reviewing Joe's show. It's really got people curious. It's got me curious. It's got Joe curious. It's like I think Joe is more inclined to believe a lot of things now that he's seen that and talk to this guy. And what a great opportunity too to get to talk to him face to face. Just wild. Really, really very wild. I liked so much about Rob's character, and also hearing what makes a strong man, because it's so much more than being strong. Like, oftentimes these guys are super nice and super friendly. Like, Martins is the same way. He once came into my bar and I was like, dude, and he wanted some food, and I think the kitchen had stopped serving, and I was like, dude, we stopped serving. And also you can't bring your bike in. He has like this big electric bike. He doesn't make a fuss. He doesn't get upset. He doesn't, okay, sorry, no problem. Super polite. But like understanding the fact that he could crush every person in my bar into like a size of a basketball with his bare hands. Just none of it's there. The same with Robert. I didn't perceive anything like it. And he talked about hurting his leg. Like, he hurt his leg in some workout, and it just went numb for a very long time. He couldn't sleep in his regular bed. He had to sleep in his truck in an upright position. And then there was another time that he was lifting, and I guess he tore his bicep, and he still lifted an incredible lift. I mean, that kind of mental strength and mental toughness, the fortitude and determination to kind of fight through those injuries, absolutely unbelievable. And, for him, he didn't win this year, but he says that the peak age for strength is kind of between 34 and 37. So he's kind of there. I'm surprised. That's, older than you'd think. I mean, a lot of athletes are really the best or the most fit kind of in their 20s, So I guess for strongmen, they got a little bit more time to kind of work up to. It's tough for him, though, he said, qualifying in America, because America has so many of the strongest men. But at the same time, I think that would be an advantage, because in some ways you get to train with more of the best guys because more of them are here, and maybe more of the best strongmen gyms. I know my buddy Martins, who won the Strongest Man this year. He trains in a gym just slightly north of where I am, and from what he was telling me, there's multiple like national level, world class strongmen there. So they have all the equipment set up, all the types of lifts and things that they would do, which are quite difficult to set up. That's not like regular gym equipment. It's like giant boulders and picking up cars, and so it probably helps to be in a place where you get that type of motivation. I think it's pretty awesome. And again, I really hope that Martins gets on there. I think now that we've had one world strongman, if people like this podcast, which I found it interesting, and who doesn't want to listen to some of the strongest men that have ever lived speak about what they do? It's fucking cool. Hopefully Martins gets on there, and I'll get some inside scoop as to what it was like and what that experience was like. But anyway, guys, thank you as always for downloading. Follow me on Joe Rogan Experience Review Instagram. Okay, so it's the same image. It's like that Joe Rogan image, but the black one.